Hey everyone. Many of you have seen the movie Titanic, or at least heard about this infamous catastrophe. But have you ever wondered, what if the ship hadn't sunk? In this video, we're going to refresh your memory of that tragic night, look at the disaster from a new perspective, and analyze whether it could have been avoided. Most importantly, we'll explore what the world would look like if the Titanic had safely reached New York. You'll learn about a book that predicted it all 14 years before the disaster, about the radio operator whose rudeness cost 1,500 lives, and about a paradox, how one tragedy saved hundreds of thousands. Grab your snacks, brew some tea. All right, let's dive in. Imagine yourself, for a minute, as the captain. You are in command of the largest ship in the world. On board are over 2,000 people, including millionaires, magnates, the elite of society. The whole world is watching your maiden voyage. Your ship is called Unsinkable. And then you start receiving messages. Icebergs ahead. What do? Do you slow down? Exactly. But Captain Smith did what everyone did in 1912. He continued at full speed. This was the standard practice of the era. Maintain speed, and the crew will spot the ice in time. He couldn't have known he was making a fatal decision. April 14th, 1912. A day that would change the maritime industry forever. In the morning, the ship Coronia reports, icebergs in your vicinity. In the afternoon, the Baltic warns, ice on your course. Captain Smith even shows the telegram to the company director, Bruce Ismay. But Ismay just puts it in his pocket. Yes, in his pocket, and forgets about it. Then, in the evening at 9:40 p.m., a critical message arrives from the ship Masaba. Vast quantities of heavy pack ice and large icebergs directly in your path. The message is received by 25-year-old radio operator Jack Phillips. He acknowledges receipt, but he doesn't pass it to the bridge. Why? He was simply swamped. The radio had broken down 2 days prior. He and his colleagues spent all night fixing it. And now, there's a massive backlog of passengers wanting to send telegrams home. These telegrams were the priority for the Marconi Company, his employer. The ice warnings, they could wait. And this is where a chain of tragic coincidences begins. 10 miles from the Titanic is the cargo steamer Californian. Its captain sees the ice ahead and makes the sensible decision to stop until morning. At 11:05 p.m., their radio operator, 20-year-old Cyril Evans, switches on his transmitter to warn nearby ships. But the Californian is so close to the Titanic that its powerful signal blasts directly into Phillips's headphones, drowning out the weak signal from the station he is communicating with. Phillips's response, recorded in the subsequent inquiry, shut up, I'm busy, I'm working Cape Race. Offended, Evans switches off the radio and goes to bed. His shift is over. He has no idea that if he had stayed at his post for just another half hour, he would have heard the first distress signal, but the radio room is now silent. At 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet peers into the darkness. There is no moon. The sea is perfectly calm, not a single ripple to break against the ice and betray its presence. Suddenly, a dark mass materializes ahead. 3 strikes of the bell, a call to the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. Less than 40 seconds pass between detection and impact. First Officer William Murdoch shouts, "Full astern, hard a starboard." This command ordered the ship to turn left. The ship begins to turn and almost misses it. The iceberg scrapes along the starboard side, below the waterline. It doesn't punch a single hole. It compromises the hull plating for 90 meters, about 300 feet. 6 watertight compartments begin to flood. Thomas Andrews, the 39-year-old chief designer, goes below, inspects the damage, and returns to the captain with the verdict. We have an hour, 2 at the most. He designed the ship to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. The water is filling 6. Captain Smith orders the lifeboats prepared. But there are over 2,000 people on board, and space for only 1,178, barely more than half. Consider this for a second. Who would you save first? At 1:15 a.m., Phillips sends the first distress signal, the old British code, CQD. His colleague, Harold Bride, suggests, try the new SOS. It might be your last chance to ever send it. They don't yet realize how prophetic those words are. At 1:45 a.m., the first lifeboat is lowered. It carries only 27 people, despite a capacity of 65. Many passengers simply refuse to believe the unsinkable ship could founder. But an hour later, As the water washes over the deck, panic begins to mount. At 2:17 a.m., Phillips sends the final signal. The generators fail. Plunged into darkness, the Titanic begins to break in half, like a toy in the hands of an invisible giant. In a matter of minutes, she slips beneath the waves, taking everyone who couldn't get far enough away with her. Most people that night died from hypothermia in the freezing water in less than 30 minutes. The ship Carpathia, having received the distress signal at 12:25 a.m., is 93 kilometers, 58 miles away. Her captain, Arthur Rostron, despite the enormous risk, orders full speed ahead. The Carpathia races at maximum speed, dodging icebergs in complete darkness across the ice field. It isn't until 3:30 a.m. that the first lights of the lifeboats are spotted. Out of 2,224 souls on board, only 705 were saved. Among the dead, John Jacob Astor IV, the wealthiest man on board. His $87 million fortune would be worth $2.9 billion today. Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining magnate, the Silver Prince. Isidore and Ida Strauss, owners of Macy's department store. Ida refused to board a lifeboat without her husband. Thomas Andrews, the designer, who knew the ship was doomed. He was last seen in the smoking room, staring at a painting. Charles Hayes, president of the railway company, who was building Canada, and Jack Phillips, the radio operator who worked until the very end. His body was never recovered. Now, the ultimate question: could it have turned out differently? To understand why the Titanic sank, we need to go back a few years. Belfast, Ireland, the largest shipyard in the British Empire. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, and the financier J.P. Morgan are discussing the future. Their rivals at the Cunard Line have just launched two high-speed liners, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, the fastest ships in the world. Ismay makes a pivotal decision. We will not compete on speed. We will compete on size and luxury. The plan is simple. 3 sister ships of the Olympic class, vessels that would dwarf everything that came before them: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. On March 31st, 1909, the Titanic's keel is laid. Length, 269 meters. Height from keel to funnels, 53 meters. Weight, 46,300 tons. The design team was led by the brightest minds in the industry. Lord Peary, director of Harland and Wolff. Thomas Andrews, 39 years old, the chief designer, who had worked his way up from an apprentice at 16 to the pinnacle of his profession. Alexander Carlisle, responsible for the safety systems. The budget, £1.5 million, exceeding $236 million today. More than 15,000 workers were involved in the construction. Over 100,000 spectators watched the launch on May 31st, 1911. The project was truly monumental, and the ship was considered unsinkable. Why? 16 watertight compartments, separated by 15 bulkheads. A double bottom 1.6 meters, 5.25 feet, high. The watertight doors could be closed from the bridge with the flick of a switch. According to Andrews' calculations, the ship could survive the flooding of any 4 compartments. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But here's the catch. The bulkheads only extended up to E-deck, not all the way to the top. Why? To allow first-class passengers unobstructed movement around the grand staircase. Right there, comfort triumphed over safety. When the bow began to sink, the water simply spilled over the top of the bulkheads from one compartment to the next, like water filling an ice cube tray. The iceberg comprised 6 compartments, 2 more than the ship could handle. But you know what's most ironic? Such an expensive and monumental project decided to skimp on lifeboats. Alexander Carlisle had designed a davit system capable of holding 48 wooden lifeboats, enough space for over 3,000 people. But the White Star Line decided that 20 were sufficient. Why? First, the regulations of 1894 required only 16 lifeboats for any ship over 10,000 tons. The Titanic weighed 46,000 tons, but legally, 16 were enough. White Star installed 20, 4 more than required. The company actually boasted about this. After all, if the ship is unsinkable, why would it need so many lifeboats? Second, first-class passengers complained that the lifeboats cluttered the deck and ruined the view. Third, the prevailing wisdom was that ships did not sink instantly. there would always be time to call for assistance. Lifeboats were seen as ferries to transport passengers to a rescue vessel, not to save everyone simultaneously. Logical. On paper, yes. In reality, a disaster. When the wreck was discovered in 1985, at a depth of 3,800 meters, 12,500 feet, scientists investigated. The findings were shocking. The hull steel was brittle in the cold, at temperatures below freezing, 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. It became fragile. It was high-quality steel by 1911 standards, but not by modern ones. The rivets in the bow section were made of wrought iron, not steel. Iron is weaker. Why were they used? Because the complex curve of the bow made it difficult to install steel rivets. It required specialized hydraulic machinery that was in short supply. When the iceberg struck, the rivets failed. The seams popped open. But here's the crucial point. Even with perfect steel and rivets, the ship still would have sunk. Why? Because the problem wasn't just the materials. It was the ideology. Captain Smith didn't maintain speed because he was reckless. He was doing what all captains did in 1912. Speed was money. Delays meant lost customers. White Star was vying with Cunard for passengers. The schedule was sacred. Captain Smith himself stated in 1907, "I cannot imagine any condition which would cause a modern ship to founder. Shipbuilding has gone beyond that." And you know what? He had grounds to believe it. In that same year, 1907, the German liner Kronprinz Wilhelm struck an iceberg head-on. The bow was crumpled, but the ship made it to port. Collisions with icebergs occurred regularly, and ships survived until the Titanic. Each decision, in isolation, seemed reasonable. Bulkheads only partway up, sufficient for any typical collision. 20 lifeboats, more than the law requires. Maximum speed, standard practice. But combined, these decisions created the perfect storm. Now, for a fascinating detail. In 1898, 14 years before the disaster, author Morgan Robertson published a novel called Futility. The plot centers on the largest unsinkable ship in the world, the Titan, striking an iceberg on an April night in the Atlantic. Due to a shortage of lifeboats, there is massive loss of life. Compare the two. Titan, 244 meters, 45,000 tons, iceberg collision on an April night. Titanic, 269 meters, 46,300 tons, iceberg collision on the night of April 14th. An eerie coincidence, isn't it? Was Robertson psychic? No. He was a former seaman with extensive experience. He knew ships. He knew the industry was building them larger and larger, and he knew the dangers of icebergs in the North Atlantic. He simply applied his expertise and some logic. As he put it, "No, I know what I'm writing about, that's all." Let's imagine, April 17th, 1912. The Titanic arrives safely in New York. Jubilant crowds, fireworks, a triumph for the White Star Line. The maiden voyage of the greatest ship in the world is a resounding success. What changes? Let's start with the people. John Jacob Astor IV. He's 47. Ahead lie the roaring 20s, Manhattan's greatest construction boom. He's already built the Astoria, the St. Regis, and the Knickerbocker hotels. Imagine the skyscrapers he would have erected over the next 20 years. His son Vincent inherited $69 million at age 20. He could have had his father as a mentor for 2 more decades. Thomas Andrews, 39. He was poised to become chairman of Harland and Wolff, designing ships through World War I, the 20s and 30s, maybe even World War II. The third ship in the series, the Britannic, sank in 1916 after hitting a mine. With Andrews' modifications, she might have survived. Charles Hayes, 55. He was developing the Transcontinental Railway across Canada and a chain of luxury hotels. After his death, his company went bankrupt in 1919. Had he lived, the landscape of Canada might look very different. But here's the critical question. Would they have fundamentally changed the world? Honestly, probably not. The Great Depression of 1929 would have hit everyone regardless. Companies failed no matter who owned them. Astor would have built more buildings. Andrews would have designed better ships. Hayes would have connected Canada by rail. But on a global scale, the world would be much the same. Now, here is the real difference. Reforms. The Titanic disaster claimed 1,500 lives in a single night. And it was this specific tragedy that triggered reforms which have saved hundreds of thousands of lives over the following century. From November 23, 1913, to January 20th, 1914, the first International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, 1914, was held in London. 13 nations participated. The changes were revolutionary. Before the Titanic, regulations required 16 lifeboats for any ship over 10,000 tons. After, there must be enough lifeboat capacity for every person on board. Crew drills, twice a month. Before the Titanic, radio operators worked inconsistent hours. After, a 24-hour radio watch is mandatory. 2 operators working in shifts, 24/7 communication. Distress signals are the absolute priority. On February 7, 1914, the International Ice Patrol was established, initiated by President Wilson. Funded by 17 nations, it tracks roughly 1,000 icebergs every year. And here's a statistic that might shock you. In the 1880s and 1890s, dozens of ships collided with ice annually. Since 1914, there has virtually been no loss of life due to iceberg collisions within the patrolled zone. Virtually none. Since 1912, the survival rate in such disasters has dramatically increased. Even the Britannic, the Titanic's sister ship, which struck a sea mine and sank faster than the Titanic, saved 1,036 out of 1,066 people. The Andrea Doria in 1956, out of 1,706 passengers, 1,660 survived. Over the decades, these reforms have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Without the Titanic, they would have happened eventually, but much later. The Titanic wasn't the first maritime disaster. So why did this one change everything? Because it captured the world's attention. The largest ship ever built. The maiden voyage of an unsinkable vessel. Numerous celebrities on board. Massive press coverage. It was a media-perfect storm. Now consider this. What if a disaster of this scale had happened a few years later? For instance, when the world was consumed by World War I. It would have delayed reforms by another 5 or even 10 years. That delay means thousands of additional deaths at sea. The Titanic claimed 1,500 lives, but that catastrophe saved hundreds of thousands of others. A brutal lesson that humanity will never forget. So, would it have been better if the Titanic hadn't sunk? A few wealthy individuals would have lived longer. A few buildings might have been constructed sooner. A few ships designed slightly better. But the reforms would have been delayed, and the human cost of that delay would have been immense. History doesn't deal in what-ifs, but sometimes the tragedy of the few saves the lives of the many, and therein lies the bitter irony of the Titanic's fate. If this dive into history resonated with you, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into alternative history like this one, and let me know in the comments. Do you think the loss of the Titanic was worth the lives saved in the aftermath? It's a difficult question, and I'm really interested in your perspective. See you in the next episode.